What would you do if someone you barely knew risked their life to save yours? The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of Beacon Hill, Boston's most prestigious neighborhood. Victoria Ashworth stepped out of her black Tesla Model S, her Louboutin heels clicking against the cobblestone driveway of her Georgian mansion. At 28, she had inherited more wealth than most people could imagine after her father's technology empire was sold to Microsoft for $8 billion. The Ashworth estate sprawled across 3 acres, featuring century-old oak trees, Japanese maples, and rare magnolias that had been her grandmother's pride. Marcus Washington adjusted his worn baseball cap as he waited by the wrought iron gates. At 35, he carried himself with quiet dignity despite the circumstances that had brought him here. A former landscape architecture graduate from Howard University, Marcus had fallen on hard times after the economic downturn devastated his small business in Washington, D.C. Now, with his daughter Zara needing medical treatment for her asthma, he had traveled to Boston seeking any work that could pay the bills. "You must be Marcus," Victoria said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. She had been raised in Connecticut boarding schools and Swiss finishing academies, but her father had taught her one valuable lesson: judge people by their character, not their circumstances. "Yes, ma'am, Marcus Washington. Thank you for this opportunity, Miss Ashworth." His voice carried the measured tone of someone who had learned to navigate spaces where he wasn't always welcome. Victoria had inherited more than money from her father, Thomas Ashworth. She had inherited his belief that everyone deserved respect and opportunity. Unlike many in her social circle, Victoria had seen her father treat their housekeeper, Mrs. Rodriguez, like family, pay for the college education of their driver's son, and donate millions to inner-city schools through the Ashworth Foundation. "Please call me Victoria. Let me show you around the grounds." She led him through gardens that rivaled those at the Arnold Arboretum. "My grandmother planted most of these trees in the 1960s. This American elm survived Dutch elm disease, and that white oak is over 200 years old. They're like living pieces of history." Marcus's eyes lit up as he examined the specimens. "That's a beautiful example of Quercus alba. See how the bark patterns differ from the red oak over there? And this magnolia, is it a Jane variety?" Victoria was surprised by his knowledge. Most of the applicants her estate manager had sent knew little beyond basic lawn care. "You studied horticulture?" "Landscape architecture at Howard, and I grew up helping my grandfather tend the grounds at Mount Vernon. He was one of the few African-American gardeners they hired in the 1970s. Marcus ran his hand along the magnolia's trunk with obvious expertise. "These trees have stories to tell." As they walked, Victoria found herself genuinely interested in Marcus's insights. He pointed out signs of oak wilt, suggested treatments for the struggling dogwood, and identified birds by their calls. This wasn't just someone looking for any job, this was someone who understood and loved the work. "The position pays $60,000 annually plus health insurance and use of the guest cottage if you need housing," Victoria said as they concluded the tour. She had planned to offer $40,000, but something about Marcus's passion and expertise made her reconsider. Marcus's eyes widened. The salary was more than he had hoped for, and the health insurance would cover Zara's treatments. "Miss Victoria, that's very generous. I won't let you down. I have one condition," Victoria said, her tone becoming serious. "I believe in treating people with dignity and respect. Anyone who works for me is part of the Ashworth family. That means you call me Victoria, you speak your mind when you have opinions about the grounds, and you never feel like you need to diminish yourself in my presence or anyone else's." Marcus had worked for wealthy families before, and most treated their staff as invisible. This was different. "I appreciate that more than you know." Over the following weeks, Marcus proved his worth. He treated each tree like a patient, carefully pruning dead branches, treating diseases, and implementing sustainable watering systems. Victoria often watched from her home office window as he worked with meticulous care, sometimes talking softly to the plants as he tended them. The other wealthy families in Beacon Hill began to notice the transformation of the Ashworth grounds. Margaret Cunningham from next door made pointed comments about certain types of people being given too much freedom, but Victoria firmly shut down such conversations. When the Beacon Hill Garden Club wanted to feature the estate in their annual tour, Victoria insisted that Marcus be credited as the landscape designer. "These trees are responding to someone who truly understands them," Victoria told her friend Sarah over lunch at the Union Club. "Marcus has brought them back to life in ways I didn't think possible." Sarah, who had grown up in the same privileged circles, raised an eyebrow. "Just be careful, Victoria. You know how people talk." "People can talk all they want," Victoria replied firmly. "Marcus is the best arborist I've ever worked with, and more importantly, he's a good man trying to provide for his family." By the end of his first month, Marcus had not only revitalized the grounds but had also submitted a comprehensive plan for expanding the garden with native Massachusetts species. Victoria approved the entire proposal, impressed by both his botanical knowledge and his commitment to environmental sustainability. As autumn approached, the Ashworth estate had become a showcase of horticultural excellence, and Marcus had found something he hadn't expected when he first walked through those iron gates: dignity, respect, and the beginning of what might become an unlikely friendship built on mutual appreciation and shared values. The crisp October morning brought the kind of New England autumn that poets wrote about. Victoria sat in her sunroom reviewing quarterly reports from the Ashworth Foundation while sipping Ethiopian coffee from her favorite Hermes porcelain cup. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she watched Marcus carefully wrapping the tender plants for winter, his movements precise and caring. "Miss Victoria?" Marcus appeared at the French doors, holding his worn Red Sox cap respectfully. "Could I speak with you about the Japanese maple collection?" "Of course, and Marcus, please sit down." Victoria gestured to the comfortable wicker chair across from her. "Would you like some coffee?" Marcus hesitated for a moment, still adjusting to Victoria's insistence on treating him as an equal. In his previous positions with wealthy families in Georgetown and Arlington, he had never been invited to sit, let alone offered refreshments. "That would be nice, thank you." As Victoria poured coffee from her silver service, Marcus opened a leather portfolio filled with detailed drawings and photographs. "I've been researching the history of your grandmother's maple collection. She had extraordinary taste. Some of these varieties are quite rare, but I've noticed that several are showing signs of verticillium wilt." Victoria leaned forward, genuinely concerned. These trees held deep sentimental value, planted by her grandmother Eleanor to commemorate family milestones. "Can they be saved?" "Most of them, yes, but it requires immediate action and some significant investment. We'd need to improve drainage, treat the soil, and possibly remove 2 trees to prevent spread to the others." Marcus spread out his detailed treatment plan, complete with cost estimates and timelines. "I've also found a specialty nursery in Vermont that has some heritage varieties that could replace what we lose." Victoria studied the meticulous plan, impressed once again by Marcus's thoroughness. "This must have taken you hours to prepare." "Trees like these deserve the effort," Marcus replied simply. "Your grandmother chose each one for a reason. I'd like to honor that." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Charles Pemberton III, Victoria's neighbor and a prominent Boston attorney who had been trying to court her for months. Charles let himself into the sunroom without knocking, a presumption that irritated Victoria but which she tolerated due to long family friendships. "Victoria, darling, I hope I'm not interrupting anything important," Charles said, his tone making it clear he didn't consider Marcus's presence significant. He barely acknowledged Marcus with a dismissive nod. "Actually, you are interrupting," Victoria replied coolly. Marcus was presenting his conservation plan for grandmother's maple collection. Charles glanced at the detailed drawings with obvious skepticism. "Surely you don't need to trouble yourself with such detailed discussions about yard work. Can't he just handle whatever needs doing?" The condescension in Charles's voice was unmistakable, and Victoria felt her temper rise. Marcus remained perfectly composed, but she could see the familiar tension in his shoulders that came when people dismissed his expertise because of his race. "Marcus has a degree in landscape architecture from Howard University and more knowledge about horticulture than anyone I've met," Victoria said firmly. "His yard work has transformed these grounds into something that's being featured in Garden and Gun magazine next month." Charles's face reddened slightly. "Of course, I didn't mean to suggest. I'm sure he's very capable at what he does. What he does is save irreplaceable living history," Victoria continued, her voice gaining strength. "These trees were planted by my grandmother to commemorate births, marriages, and important family moments. Marcus understands that they're not just plants, they're living memorials." Marcus quietly gathered his papers, recognizing the tension. "Miss Victoria, I can present this plan another time when you're not busy." "No, please stay," Victoria said firmly. "Charles, unless you have something urgent to discuss, I'd prefer to finish this conversation with Marcus." Charles's jaw tightened. He wasn't accustomed to being dismissed, especially in favor of hired help. "Very well. Perhaps we can discuss the Beacon Hill Preservation Society gala another time." He left with barely concealed irritation. After Charles departed, Victoria turned to Marcus with an apologetic expression. "I'm sorry about that. Some people in my social circle haven't evolved much beyond their father's attitudes." "You don't need to apologize," Marcus said quietly. "I've dealt with worse. But I appreciate you standing up for the work we're doing here. It's not just the work, Marcus. It's about treating people with basic human dignity." Victoria's voice carried a passion that surprised them both. "My father built his fortune by recognizing talent wherever he found it. Some of his best innovations came from engineers and programmers that other companies overlooked because they didn't fit certain profiles. Over the following weeks, Victoria found herself spending more time in the gardens, genuinely interested in Marcus's approach to tree care. She learned about soil pH, understood the importance of proper pruning techniques, and began to see the grounds through his expert eyes. "You know," Victoria said one afternoon as they watched him treat a diseased oak, "I've lived here most of my life, but I never really saw these trees until you showed me how to look at them." Marcus smiled, the first truly relaxed expression she had seen from him. "That's what my grandfather taught me at Mount Vernon. He used to say that most people look at trees and see decoration, but every tree is an individual with its own personality and needs." Their working relationship was evolving into something deeper, a mutual respect based on shared values and genuine appreciation for each other's perspectives. Victoria began to understand that Marcus's expertise extended far beyond horticulture. He had insights about sustainability, environmental justice, and the intersection of nature and community that challenged her own thinking. When the garden and gun photographer arrived to capture the estate's transformation, Victoria insisted that Marcus be included in the article as the landscape designer. The resulting feature would showcase not just the beauty of the grounds, but the skill and vision of the man who had brought them back to life. As November arrived with its first frost warnings, Marcus worked late into the evening, carefully protecting the tender plants. Victoria brought him coffee and found herself staying to help, learning to wrap delicate branches and cover sensitive root systems. Working together in the gathering twilight, they were building something neither had expected, a friendship based on mutual respect, shared purpose, and the understanding that true worth has nothing to do with the circumstances of one's birth. The first snowfall of December transformed the Ashworth estate into a winter wonderland worthy of a Currier and Ives painting. Victoria stood at her kitchen window, watching Marcus methodically clear pathways with a care that most would consider unnecessary for mere walkways. But she had learned that Marcus approached every task with the same meticulous attention, whether pruning prize roses or shoveling snow. "Good morning," she called out, stepping onto the back terrace with 2 steaming mugs of hot chocolate. The gesture had become routine over the past month, a small acknowledgement of their growing friendship. "Morning, Miss Victoria." Marcus straightened up, accepting the warm drink gratefully. "The Japanese maples came through that cold snap better than I expected. The new mulching technique is working." Victoria had grown comfortable with these morning conversations, finding in Marcus a thoughtful companion whose insights extended far beyond horticulture. "I got a call from the editor at Garden and Gun yesterday. The article is generating more interest than they anticipated. 3 other magazines want to feature the estate." Marcus's expression grew serious. "I hope that won't cause problems for you with your neighbors. I know some of them weren't pleased about the last article." Indeed, the feature highlighting Marcus's work had caused quite a stir in certain Beacon Hill circles. Margaret Cunningham had made several pointed comments at the Union Club about certain people getting above their station, while Charles Pemberton had suggested that Victoria was being too generous with recognition. "Let them talk," Victoria said firmly. "The truth is, you've transformed these grounds into something extraordinary. Why shouldn't you get credit for your work?" As they walked among the snow-laden trees, Marcus shared stories from his childhood in southeast Washington, where his grandfather had taught him that dignity came from taking pride in whatever work you did, regardless of how others perceived it. Victoria found herself sharing memories of her grandmother Eleanor, who had defied social conventions by insisting that everyone who worked for the family be treated with respect and paid fairly. "Your grandmother sounds like she was ahead of her time," Marcus observed, examining the protective wrapping on a young dogwood. "She was. She used to say that character had nothing to do with bank accounts or family names." Victoria paused by the ancient oak tree that dominated the center of the garden. "She planted this tree the day my father was born. Said she wanted him to grow up understanding that strength comes from deep roots and reaching toward the light." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a black BMW sedan. Victoria's cousin Bradley Ashworth emerged, his expensive Armani overcoat perfectly tailored, but his expression decidedly unpleasant. Bradley managed the family's real estate investments and had never approved of Victoria's philanthropic tendencies or her unconventional approach to managing the estate. "Victoria, we need to talk," Bradley announced without preamble, barely acknowledging Marcus's presence. "Good morning to you too, Bradley," Victoria replied dryly. "I'd like you to meet Marcus Washington, our landscape architect." Bradley's handshake was perfunctory, his attention already focused on Victoria. "This is actually what I wanted to discuss. There's been talk at the club about your staffing choices. Some of the board members for the Ashworth Foundation are expressing concerns." Victoria felt her temper rising. "Concerns about what, exactly?" "About appearances, Victoria. About maintaining appropriate professional boundaries." Bradley's voice carried the condescending tone he had used since they were children. "There are photos in that magazine article of you working alongside the help. People are starting to question your judgment." Marcus stepped back slightly, recognizing the family tension, but Victoria moved closer to him, making her position clear. "Marcus isn't the help, Bradley. He's a trained professional who has transformed these grounds into something that's being celebrated in national publications. And if people have problems with me treating my employees with respect, that says more about them than it does about me." Bradley's face reddened. "This isn't about respect, Victoria. It's about maintaining proper social distinctions. Father built this fortune by understanding hierarchy, not by blurring lines. Father built this fortune by recognizing talent and treating people fairly." Victoria shot back. "He would be appalled by your attitude." The argument continued for several uncomfortable minutes, with Bradley becoming increasingly explicit about his concerns regarding Victoria's friendship with Marcus. Finally, Marcus quietly excused himself, not wanting to be the cause of family discord. After Bradley left in a huff, threatening to bring the matter before the foundation board, Victoria found Marcus in the greenhouse, tending to seedlings for next spring's plantings. "I'm sorry you had to witness that," she said, settling onto a work stool beside his potting table. "Family dynamics can be complicated," Marcus replied diplomatically. "But I don't want to create problems for you, Miss Victoria. If my presence here is causing issues." "Stop right there," Victoria interrupted firmly. "You're not creating problems, Marcus. You're exposing problems that already existed. There's a difference." She watched as he carefully transplanted delicate herb seedlings, his large hands surprisingly gentle with the fragile plants. "Can I ask you something personal?" Marcus nodded, not looking up from his work. "How do you handle it? The comments, the assumptions, the way some people treat you." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering his response. "My grandfather used to tell me that dignity isn't something other people can give you or take away. It's something you carry inside yourself. He said that every time someone underestimated him because of his skin color, it was their loss, not his." "That's a lot of grace," Victoria observed. "Grace is what my daughter needs to see in me," Marcus replied simply. "She's watching how I handle adversity, how I respond to unfairness. I want her to learn that our worth isn't determined by other people's limitations." Victoria was struck by the wisdom in his words. Despite her wealth and privilege, she realized that Marcus possessed something that couldn't be bought, an unshakable sense of self-worth that allowed him to navigate prejudice without becoming bitter or angry. "Would you like to meet her?" Marcus asked suddenly. "Zara's coming to visit next weekend. She's been asking about the famous trees her daddy takes care of." The invitation touched Victoria deeply. She understood that Marcus was offering her something precious, a glimpse into the part of his life that mattered most to him. "I would be honored to meet her," Victoria said sincerely. As the short winter day faded into evening, Victoria realized that her friendship with Marcus had become one of the most meaningful relationships in her life. In a world where most people approached her with agendas or expectations, Marcus offered something rare: genuine companionship based on mutual respect and shared values. The conversation with Bradley had clarified something important for Victoria. She was tired of living according to other people's narrow definitions of appropriate behavior. If treating people with dignity and forming friendships based on character rather than social status made her unconventional, then she would embrace being unconventional. Outside, the snow continued to fall on the sleeping garden, covering everything in a blanket of white that made no distinctions between the rare Japanese maples and the common evergreens. In nature's democracy, beauty and worth were measured by different standards than those imposed by human society. The Saturday morning sun painted the snow-covered estate in shades of gold and silver when 8-year-old Zara Washington stepped out of Marcus's weathered Honda Civic, her eyes wide with wonder at the grandeur surrounding her. She wore her best dress, a navy blue number her grandmother had bought for church, and clutched a small bouquet of dandelions she had picked from their apartment complex in Roxbury. "Daddy, this place looks like a fairy tale," Zara whispered, her voice filled with awe as she took in the Georgian mansion with its tall windows and ivy-covered walls. Victoria watched from her front door, immediately charmed by the little girl's obvious excitement. She had spent the morning in the kitchen with her housekeeper Elena, preparing homemade cookies and hot chocolate, wanting everything to be perfect for this important introduction. "You must be Zara," Victoria said, kneeling down to the child's eye level. "Your father has told me so many wonderful things about you." Zara looked up at Marcus for reassurance, then stepped forward with the confidence of a child raised to be polite but not subservient. "Thank you for taking care of my daddy, Miss Victoria. And these are for you." She held out the small bouquet with serious ceremony. Victoria accepted the dandelions as if they were the finest roses from her greenhouse. "These are beautiful, Zara. Thank you so much. Would you like to see the trees your father has been working so hard to help?" As they walked through the gardens, Zara peppered Marcus with questions about every plant and tree, her curiosity boundless. Victoria was struck by the obvious pride in Marcus's voice as he explained his work to his daughter, and by Zara's genuine interest in understanding the science behind what he did. "Daddy says you're helping him save the old trees," Zara said to Victoria as they paused beneath the ancient oak. "He says some of them are older than America." "Not quite that old," Victoria laughed, "but this oak was planted before your great-great-grandmother was born. Your father is like a doctor for trees. He helps them stay healthy and strong." They spent the morning exploring the estate, with Marcus explaining his conservation work while Zara asked increasingly sophisticated questions. Victoria was impressed by the child's intelligence and curiosity and touched by the obvious closeness between father and daughter. "Miss Victoria," Zara said as they headed back toward the house for lunch, "Daddy says you're different from other rich people. What makes you different?" The innocent directness of the question caught Victoria off guard. She glanced at Marcus, who looked slightly embarrassed by his daughter's bluntness. "Well," Victoria said thoughtfully, "I suppose it's because I learned that a person's worth has nothing to do with how much money they have. Some of the finest people I know don't have much money at all, and some of the wealthiest people I know aren't very nice." Zara nodded solemnly as if this confirmed something she had already suspected. Over lunch in the sunny breakfast nook, Victoria learned more about Marcus's life outside the estate. Zara chattered about her school, her friends, and her dreams of becoming a scientist like Katherine Johnson, the NASA mathematician she had learned about in her African-American history class. "Daddy says I can be anything I want to be if I work hard and stay in school," Zara announced, taking a bite of Elena's homemade chocolate chip cookies. "Your father is absolutely right," Victoria agreed. "And if you ever need help with science projects or want to learn more about plants and trees, I hope you'll come visit us here." The offer was spontaneous but heartfelt. Victoria found herself genuinely drawn to this bright, confident child who so clearly adored her father. After lunch, they bundled up for a winter walk through the estate's wooded areas. Marcus pointed out various native species and explained how different trees adapted to New England's harsh winters. Zara listened intently, occasionally running ahead to examine interesting specimens. "She's remarkable," Victoria told Marcus as they watched Zara carefully sketch a distinctive bark pattern in a small notebook she carried everywhere. "She gets that curiosity from her mother," Marcus said quietly. "Lisa was a teacher before she got sick. She used to say that questions were more important than answers because they kept you learning." Victoria had heard brief mentions of Marcus's late wife but had never pressed for details. Now, seeing the lingering sadness in his eyes as he watched their daughter, she understood the depth of loss he carried. "Zara is lucky to have you," Victoria said simply. "Some days I wonder if I'm enough," Marcus admitted. "Raising a daughter alone, especially a daughter as bright as Zara. I want to give her every opportunity, but there are limitations." "There are always limitations," Victoria replied. "But look at her, she's confident, curious, kind, and clearly adores you. You're doing something very right." As the afternoon progressed, Victoria found herself seeing the estate through Zara's eyes, not as a symbol of wealth and privilege, but as a living laboratory full of wonders to explore and understand. The child's enthusiasm was infectious, and Victoria realized she was enjoying herself more than she had in months. When it came time for Marcus and Zara to leave, the little girl surprised Victoria by giving her a spontaneous hug. "Thank you for being nice to my daddy," Zara whispered. "And thank you for letting me see the fairy tale trees." After they left, Victoria stood in her empty mansion, struck by how quiet and lifeless it seemed after being filled with Zara's laughter and questions. She realized that in all her years of hosting elaborate dinner parties and charity events, she had rarely experienced the simple joy that came from spending time with people who valued her for herself rather than her social status or wealth. That evening, she called her lawyer and asked him to research scholarship programs for academically gifted children from underrepresented communities. If Zara Washington was going to grow up to be the scientist she dreamed of becoming, Victoria wanted to make sure financial barriers wouldn't stand in her way. The day had revealed something important to Victoria. Her friendship with Marcus wasn't just about mutual respect between employer and employee or even about shared interests in horticulture and conservation. It was about recognizing in each other the kind of character and values that transcended social boundaries. As she prepared for bed, Victoria found herself looking forward to Monday morning when Marcus would return to continue their work in the gardens. But more than that, she found herself hoping that Zara would visit again soon, bringing with her that wonderful combination of innocence and wisdom that only children possess. For the first time in years, Victoria felt like she was building relationships based on genuine connection rather than social obligation. In Marcus and Zara Washington, she had found something her wealth had never been able to buy: authentic friendship built on mutual respect, shared values, and the simple recognition of each other's essential humanity. The unseasonably warm April afternoon had drawn Victoria to her favorite spot in the garden, a wrought iron bench positioned beneath the spreading canopy of the centuries-old white oak that served as the estate's magnificent centerpiece. She had changed from her business attire into comfortable jeans and a cream-colored cashmere sweater, carrying with her the latest quarterly reports from the Ashworth Foundation and a glass of fresh lemonade that Elena had prepared. The past month had been particularly stressful. The foundation board, influenced by Bradley and several other family members, had been questioning Victoria's management decisions and her unconventional approaches to both the estate and the charitable organization. Charles Pemberton had been especially vocal, suggesting that Victoria needed masculine guidance in making important decisions. The pressure had been exhausting, and Victoria had been looking forward to this quiet moment among the trees that Marcus had helped restore to their full glory. She settled onto the bench with a contented sigh, appreciating the dappled sunlight filtering through the oak's massive canopy. The tree had been her grandmother's favorite, and sitting beneath it always brought Victoria a sense of peace and connection to family history. She opened the foundation reports, trying to focus on the numbers that documented their charitable giving, but her mind kept wandering to more pleasant thoughts. Marcus was working in the far corner of the estate, preparing new planting beds for the heritage roses that would arrive next week. Over the past 6 months, their professional relationship had evolved into something deeper and more meaningful than Victoria had experienced with most people in her privileged social circle. Marcus treated her with respect, but not deference. He challenged her thinking about environmental issues and social responsibility, while sharing insights drawn from his own experiences navigating a world that often undervalued his contributions. The sound of Marcus's voice drifted across the garden as he spoke on his phone with the nursery in Vermont, discussing the care requirements for the antique rose varieties. Victoria smiled, remembering how nervous he had been during their first meeting, how carefully he had chosen his words and maintained appropriate distance. Now, their conversations flowed naturally, covering everything from soil composition to social justice, from Zara's academic achievements to Victoria's struggles with family expectations. A gentle breeze stirred the oak's massive branches, creating a subtle creaking sound that Victoria had grown to love. She leaned back against the bench, closing her eyes for a moment and letting the warmth of the afternoon sun wash over her face. This was what she had been missing in her carefully orchestrated social life: moments of genuine peace and authenticity. The foundation reports lay forgotten in her lap as Victoria allowed herself to simply exist in the present moment. The estate had become a sanctuary, not just because of its physical beauty, but because of the sense of purpose and genuine relationship that Marcus had brought to it. His expertise had transformed the grounds, but more importantly, his character had challenged Victoria to examine her own values and priorities. She thought about Zara's last visit, how the precocious 8-year-old had questioned everything with scientific curiosity while maintaining the kind of optimism that only children possess. Victoria had established a scholarship fund specifically designed to support students like Zara, academically gifted children from underrepresented communities who showed promise in STEM fields. The decision had caused more controversy within the family, but Victoria no longer cared about their narrow-minded objections. The oak's branches swayed gently overhead, some extending nearly 40 feet from the massive trunk. Victoria had learned from Marcus that the tree was approximately 250 years old, making it a living witness to American history. It had survived Revolutionary War battles, weathered countless storms, and provided shade for generations of the Ashworth family. Marcus treated it with the reverence it deserved, carefully monitoring its health and ensuring that its root system remained protected despite the extensive foot traffic around the estate. As Victoria sat in peaceful contemplation, she became vaguely aware of a subtle change in the sounds around her. The gentle creaking of branches had intensified slightly, but she attributed it to the strengthening afternoon breeze. Her attention remained focused on the sense of contentment that had settled over her, a feeling that had become increasingly rare as family pressures mounted. Marcus had finished his phone call and was now working with silent concentration, his movements efficient and purposeful as he prepared the soil for the new plantings. Victoria appreciated his work ethic and the obvious pride he took in every aspect of his responsibilities. Unlike many people in her world who performed tasks half-heartedly or delegated everything to others, Marcus approached each job with complete commitment. The creaking sound grew more pronounced, but Victoria, lost in her thoughts about the positive changes that Marcus had brought to both the estate and her life, didn't immediately recognize the potential danger developing directly above her head. The ancient oak, despite Marcus's careful attention, had developed a stress fracture in one of its major branches during the recent ice storm. The warm weather and gentle breeze were gradually widening the crack, creating a situation that would soon become critical. Victoria shifted slightly on the bench, adjusting the foundation reports in her lap and reaching for her glass of lemonade. The simple movement placed her directly beneath the compromised branch, which extended nearly 15 feet above her head and weighed several hundred pounds. The branch had provided shade and beauty for decades, but the structural damage from winter weather had made it a silent threat waiting for the right combination of circumstances to become dangerous. The afternoon sun continued to filter through the oak's canopy, creating beautiful patterns of light and shadow that danced across Victoria's serene face. She had no awareness of the danger developing above her, no indication that this peaceful moment beneath her favorite tree was about to become a life-threatening crisis that would change everything about her relationship with Marcus and her understanding of what truly mattered in life. The estate's tranquil beauty masked the approaching moment when years of social barriers and prejudices would be rendered meaningless by a simple act of human courage and compassion. Victoria remained blissfully unaware, enjoying what might have been her last moments of peace beneath the ancient oak that had sheltered her family for generations. The sharp crack that split the afternoon air was like a gunshot echoing across the manicured grounds of the Ashworth estate. Marcus Washington looked up from the rose bed he was preparing, his trained ear immediately recognizing the sound of stressed wood giving way. His eyes swept the landscape until they found the source. High in the ancient white oak's canopy, a massive branch was separating from the trunk with terrifying inevitability. Time seemed to slow as Marcus realized that Victoria sat directly beneath the failing branch, completely absorbed in her reading and oblivious to the danger materializing above her head. The branch, easily 3 feet in diameter and extending 15 feet from the main trunk, would weigh several hundred pounds, more than enough to cause fatal injuries. Without conscious thought, Marcus dropped his tools and sprinted across the estate grounds, his long stride covering the 100 yards between his work area and the oak tree faster than he had ever moved in his life. His mind calculated angles and timing with the precision that had made him an exceptional athlete in his Howard University days, but this wasn't about personal achievement. This was about saving the life of someone who had become genuinely important to him. "Victoria," he shouted as he ran, hoping to alert her to move, but she remained focused on her papers, the sound of his voice not yet registering as urgent. The branch continued its inexorable descent, gravity and physics combining to create a deadly trajectory that would intersect with Victoria's position in mere seconds. Marcus could see the precise moment when she would look up, when recognition would dawn in her eyes, when she would understand the danger, but by then it would be too late for her to move clear of the impact zone. With a final burst of speed that drew on every resource of strength and determination he possessed, Marcus launched himself toward the bench where Victoria sat. His shoulder struck her midsection just as she looked up in confusion, his momentum carrying both of them clear of the bench and into the soft grass beside the oak's massive trunk. The branch struck the wrought iron bench with a thunderous crash that shook the ground and sent metalwork fragments flying in all directions. The beautiful bench where Victoria had spent countless peaceful hours was completely destroyed, crushed beneath the weight of the ancient wood that had fallen with devastating force. For a moment, Victoria and Marcus lay tangled together on the grass, both breathing heavily from the shock and adrenaline of the near miss. Victoria's foundation reports were scattered across the ground, their neat columns of numbers suddenly seeming insignificant compared to the reality of what had just occurred. "Are you hurt?" Marcus asked urgently, his hands gently checking for injuries as his eyes searched her face for signs of trauma. Victoria stared at the destroyed bench, then at the massive branch that had missed her by inches, her mind struggling to process how close she had come to serious injury or death. I don't think so, she managed, her voice shaky with the realization of what Marcus had just done for her. The branch must have been damaged in that ice storm last month, Marcus said, helping her to her feet with gentle care. I should have noticed the stress fracture during my inspections. I'm sorry, Victoria. This was my responsibility. Your responsibility? Victoria's voice gained strength as she turned to face him fully. Marcus, you just saved my life. You risked your own safety to protect me. The magnitude of what had transpired was beginning to sink in for both of them. In a split second, Marcus had made a choice that transcended their professional relationship, their social differences, and all the complicated dynamics that had surrounded their friendship. He had seen another human being in danger and had responded with immediate, selfless action. I couldn't let anything happen to you, Marcus said simply, his voice carrying an emotional weight that spoke to the depth of respect and genuine care that had developed between them over the past months. Victoria felt tears welling in her eyes as she looked at this man who had not hesitated to put himself at risk for her sake. All the conversations about social boundaries and appropriate relationships suddenly seemed absurd in the face of what had just occurred. Marcus hadn't seen a wealthy white woman who employed him, he had seen a friend in mortal danger and had acted without regard for anything except her safety. Marcus, Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion, I don't know how to thank you. You could have been seriously hurt. You don't need to thank me, Marcus replied, gently brushing grass from her sweater. I'm just grateful we're both okay. As they stood among the scattered papers and debris from the destroyed bench, Victoria realized that something fundamental had shifted between them. The artificial barriers that society had tried to impose on their friendship had been shattered as completely as the wrought iron bench beneath the fallen branch. Elena came running from the house, having heard the crash, followed by two gardeners from the neighboring estate who had witnessed the dramatic rescue. As word spread through the Beacon Hill community about what had happened, Victoria found herself fielding phone calls from neighbors and friends who wanted to confirm the details of the story. Is it true that your gardener saved your life? Margaret Cunningham asked when she called that evening, her tone suggesting she found the entire situation somehow inappropriate. Marcus Washington is a landscape architect with degrees from Howard University, Victoria replied firmly. And yes, he saved my life without any regard for his own safety. I owe him everything. The next morning, Victoria called an emergency meeting of the Ashworth Foundation Board. She had spent the night thinking about what Marcus's selfless action had taught her about character, courage, and the things that truly mattered in life. I want to make some changes to the Foundation's mission and funding priorities, she announced to the assembled board members, including her cousin Bradley and Charles Pemberton. We're going to establish a new program focused on supporting educational opportunities for children from underrepresented communities, particularly in STEM fields. Bradley shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Victoria, don't you think you should take some time to recover from your accident before making major decisions? This isn't about the accident, Bradley. This is about recognizing that talent and character exist in every community and that our foundation should be actively working to break down barriers rather than maintaining them. Charles leaned forward with obvious concern. Victoria, I understand you're grateful to your employee for his quick thinking, but surely you're not suggesting that one incident should reshape the entire foundation's approach? I'm suggesting that yesterday's incident reminded me of something I should never have forgotten, Victoria replied with quiet determination. Character isn't determined by someone's zip code, their family name, or their bank account. Marcus Washington demonstrated more courage and selflessness in 30 seconds than most people show in a lifetime. She went on to outline her vision for the new program, which would provide scholarships, mentoring, and educational support for students like Zara Washington who showed academic promise but faced financial obstacles. The program would also fund community gardens and environmental education initiatives in underserved areas. The name of the program will be the Millionaire Ashworth Initiative for Educational Excellence, Victoria announced, honoring my grandmother's belief that everyone deserves respect and opportunity regardless of their circumstances. The board meeting grew contentious, with several members expressing concerns about the foundation's changing direction and the inappropriate influence of Victoria's personal relationships on charitable decisions. But Victoria had found her voice and her purpose, and she would not be swayed by narrow-minded objections. Over the following weeks, as plans for the Millionaire Ashworth Initiative moved forward, Victoria noticed a subtle but significant shift in how people in her social circle treated her. Some, like Charles and Bradley, became increasingly critical of her decisions. Others, however, expressed quiet admiration for her willingness to challenge conventional thinking and use her resources to create meaningful change. Marcus continued his work on the estate, but their relationship had evolved beyond the boundaries of employer and employee. They were now partners in a shared vision of environmental stewardship and social responsibility. Victoria often joined him in the gardens, learning about sustainable practices and discussing how the estate could serve as a model for environmentally conscious landscaping. "You know," Marcus said one afternoon as they worked together planting native wildflowers in an area that had previously been formal lawn, "Zara asked me something interesting last week." "What was that?" Victoria asked, carefully spacing seedlings according to Marcus's instructions. "She asked if you were going to be part of our family now." Marcus's tone was carefully neutral, but Victoria could hear the deeper question beneath his daughter's innocent words. Victoria paused in her planting, considering the implications of Zara's question. Over the past months, she had found in Marcus and his daughter the kind of authentic relationship that had been missing from her life. Their friendship was based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine care for each other's well-being. "What did you tell her?" Victoria asked. "I told her that families come in many different forms," Marcus replied, "and that the most important thing is that people care about each other and support each other." Victoria smiled, understanding that Marcus was offering her something precious, acceptance into the small, close-knit family that he and Zara had created together. It wasn't a conventional arrangement by society's standards, but it was built on something more solid than social expectations, genuine love and mutual respect. As the sun set over the restored gardens of the Ashworth estate, Victoria realized that the falling branch had done more than threaten her physical safety. It had shattered the artificial barriers that had kept her from recognizing what truly mattered in life. In Marcus Washington, she had found not just a friend, but a person whose character and courage had challenged her to become a better version of herself. The estate's ancient oak tree, now professionally pruned and treated by Marcus's expert care, stood as a symbol of resilience and renewal. Like the tree, Victoria's life had been damaged by storms and prejudice, but with proper care and attention it could grow stronger and more beautiful than ever before. In the months that followed, the Millionaire Ashworth initiative would provide educational opportunities for hundreds of students, while the estate itself became a model of sustainable landscaping practices. But perhaps most importantly, Victoria had learned that true wealth isn't measured in dollars or social status. It's found in the relationships we build with people who see us for who we really are and love us anyway. The bench beneath the oak tree was eventually replaced with a simple wooden structure that bore a small plaque, "In gratitude for the courage to act and the wisdom to see beyond appearances." It served as a quiet reminder that sometimes the most important moments in life come not from grand gestures or elaborate plans, but from the simple human decision to put someone else's welfare before our own.